Chapter 28. The weather was unusually warm for the last day of October. We didn't even need jackets. The wind was growing stronger, and Jem said it might be raining before we got home. There was no moon. The streetlight on the corner cast sharp shadows on the Radley house. I heard Jem laugh softly. Bet nobody bothers them tonight, he said. Jem was carrying my ham costume, rather awkwardly, as it was hard to hold. I thought it gallant of him to do so. It's a very scary place, though, ain't it? I said. Who doesn't mean anybody any harm, but I'm glad right you're along. You know, Atticus wouldn't let you go to the schoolhouse by yourself, Jem said. Don't see why. It's just around the corner and across the yard. That yard's a mighty long place for little girls to cross at night, Jem teased. Ain't you scared of haints? We laughed. Haints, hot steams, incantations, secret signs had vanished with our years as mist with sunrise. What was that old thing Jem said? Angel bright, life and death, get off the road, don't suck my breath. Cut it out now, I said. We're in front of the Radley place. Jem said, Boo must not be at home. Listen. High above us in the darkness, a solitary mocker poured out his repertoire in blissful unawareness of whose tree he sat in, plunged a shrill key. Key of the sunflower bird to the irascible quack of a blue jay, to the sad lament of poor Will, poor Will, poor Will. We turned the corner and I tripped on a root growing in the road. Jem tried to help me, but all I did was drop my costume in the dust. I didn't fall, though, and as soon as we were on our way again, we turned off the road and entered the schoolyard. It was pitch black. How do you know where we're at, Jem? I asked, when we had gone a few steps. I can tell we're under the big oak because we're passing through a cool spot. Careful now, don't fall again. We'd slowed to a cautious gait, and we were feeling our way forward so as not to bump into the tree. The tree was a single ancient oak. 2 children could not reach around its trunk and touch hands. It was far away from teachers, their spies, and curious neighbors. It was near the Radley lot, but the Radleys were not curious. A small patch of earth beneath its branches was packed hard from many fights and furtive crap games. The lights in the high school auditorium were blazing in the distance, but they blinded us, if anything. Don't look ahead, Scout, Jem said. Look at the ground and you won't fall. You should have bought a flashlight, Jem. I didn't know it was going to be this dark. Didn't look like it'd be this dark earlier in the evening. So cloudy, that's why. It'll hold off for a while, though. Someone leaped at us. Gosh almighty, Jem yelled. A circle of light burst into our faces, and Cecil Jacobs jumped in glee behind it. Ha ha, gotcha, he shrieked. Thought you'd be coming along this way. What are you doing out of here by yourself, boy? Ain't you scared of Boo Radley? Cecil had ridden safely to the auditorium with his parents, hadn't seen us, and ventured down this far because he knew good and well we'd be coming along. He thought Mr. Finch would be with us, though. Shucks. Ain't much but around the corner, said Jem. Who's scared to go around the corner? We had to admit that Cecil was pretty good, though. He had given us a fright. And he could tell it all over the schoolhouse. That was his privilege. Say, I said, ain't you a cow tonight? Where's your costume? It's up behind the stage, he said. Miss Merriweather says the pageant ain't coming on for a while. You can put yours by the back of the stage by mine, Scout, and we can go with the rest of them. This was an excellent idea, Jem thought. He also thought it was a good thing Cecil and I would be together. This way, Jem was left to go with people his own age. When we reached the auditorium, the whole town was there, except Atticus, and the ladies worn out from decorating, and the usual outcasts and shut-ins. Most of the county, it seemed, was there. The hall was teeming with slicked-up country people. The high school building had a wide downstairs hallway, and people milled around booths that had been installed along each side. Jem, I forgot my money, I sighed when I saw them. Atticus didn't, Jem said. Here's 30 cents. You can do 6 things. I'll see you later on. My background. Okay, I said, quite content with 30 cents and Cecil. I went down with Cecil to the front of the auditorium, through a door on one side and a backstage. I got rid of my ham costume and I departed in a hurry, for Miss Merriweather was standing at the lectern in front of the first row of seats, making last-minute frenzied changes to the script. How much money you got? I asked Cecil. Cecil had 30 cents, too, which made us even. We squandered our first nickels at the House of Horrors, which scared us not at all. We entered the black 7th grade room and were led around the temporary ghoul in residence and were made to touch several objects allegedly to be component parts of a human being. Here are his eyes, we were told when we touched 2 peeled grapes in a saucer. Here's his heart, which felt like raw liver. Here are his innards, and then our hands were thrust into a plate of cold spaghetti. Cecil and I visited several booths. We each brought a sack of Miss Judge Taylor's homemade divinity. I wanted a bob for apples, but Cecil said it wasn't sanitary. His mother said that he might catch something from everybody's heads being in the same tub. Ain't anything around town now to catch, I protested. But Cecil said his mother said it was unsanitary to eat after folks. I later asked Aunt Alexandra about this, and she said people who held such views were usually climbers. We were about to purchase a blob of taffy when Miss Merriweather's runners appeared and told us to go backstage. It was time to get ready. The auditorium was filling with people. The Macon County High School band had assembled in front below the stage. The stage footlights were on, and the red velvet curtain rippled and billowed from the scurrying going on behind it. Backstage, Cecil and I found the narrow hallway teeming with people, adults in homemade three-cornered hats, Confederate caps, Spanish-American war hats, and World War helmets. Children dressed in various agricultural enterprises crowded around one small window. "Somebody smashed my costume!" I wailed in dismay. Ms. Merriweather galloped to me, reshaped the chicken wire, and thrust me inside. "You all right in there, Scout?" asked Cecil. "You sound like you're far off." You sound like you're on the other side of a hill." "You don't sound any nearer," I said. The band played the national anthem, and we heard the audience rise. Then the bass drum sounded. Ms. Merriweather, stationed behind her lectern beside the band, said, "Macon County ad astra per aspera." The bass drum boomed again. "That means," said Miss Merriweather, translating for the rustic elements, "from the mud to the stars." She added unnecessarily, it seemed to me, "a pageant." "I reckon they wouldn't know what it was if she didn't tell them," whispered Cecil, who was immediately shushed. "The whole town knows it," I breathed. "But the country folks will come in," Cecil said. "Be quiet back there," a man's voice ordered. We were silent. The bass drum went boom with every sentence Miss Merriweather uttered. She chanted mournfully about Macon County being older than the state, and that it was a part of Mississippi and Alabama territories, and that the first white man to set foot in the virgin forests was the probate judge's great-grandfather 5 times removed, who was never heard of again. And then came the fearless Colonel Macon, for whom the county was named. Andrew Jackson appointed him to a position of authority. Also, yeah, this is boring, so you can fast forward by like a minute and then you'd be okay. Andrew Jackson was appointed to him to a position of authority, and Colonel Macon's misplaced self-confidence and slender sense of direction brought disaster to all who rode with him in the Creek Indian Wars. Colonel Macon persevered in his efforts to make the region safe for democracy, but his first campaign was his last. His orders relayed to him by a friendly Indian runner were to move south. After consulting a tree to ascertain from his liking which way was south, and taking no lead from the subordinates who ventured to correct him, Colonel Macon sent out a purposeful journey to rout the enemy and entangled his troops so far north the rest, and the performers proved evil that they were eventually rescued by settlers moving inland. Miss Merriweather gave a 30-minute description of Colonel Macon's exploits. I discovered that if I bet my knees I could tuck him under my costume more or less sit. I sat down and listened to Miss Merriweather drone on in the bass drums bomb, and we were soon fast asleep. They said later that Miss Merriweather was putting all of her effort into the grand finale, that she had crooned "pork" with a confidence born of pine trees and buttered beans, entering on cue. She waited for a few seconds and then called "pork." When nothing materialized, she yelled "pork." I must have heard her in my sleep, or the band playing Dixie woke me, but it was Miss Merriweather triumphantly mounting the stage with the state flag that I chose to make my entrance. Chose is incorrect. I thought I'd better catch up with the rest of them. They told me later that Judge Taylor went out behind the auditorium and stood there slapping his knees so hard Mrs. Taylor had to bring him a glass of water and one of his pills. Miss Merriweather seemed to have a hit. Everybody was cheering so. But she caught me backstage and told me I had ruined her pageant. She made me feel awful, but when Jim came to fetch me, he was sympathetic. He said he couldn't see my costume much from where he was sitting. How he can tell I was feeling bad under my costume, I don't know, but he said I did all right. I just came in a little late. That was all. Jem was becoming almost as good at Atticus as making you feel right when things went wrong. Almost. Not even Jem can make me go through that crowd. He consented to wait backstage with me until the audience left. "Do you want to take it off, Scout?" he asked. "Nah, I'll just keep it on," I said. "I can hide my mortification under it." "You all want to ride home?" someone asked. "No, sir, thank you," I heard Jim say. "It's just a little walk." "Be careful of Haints," the voice said. "Better still, tell the Haints to be careful of Scout." "There aren't many folks left now," Jim told me. "Let's go." We went through the auditorium to the hallway, and then back down the steps. It was still black dark. The remaining cars were parked on the other side of the building, and their headlights were a little help. "If some were going in our direction, we could see better," said Jim. "Here, Scout, let me hold on to your hock. You might lose your balance." "I can see all right." "Yeah, but you might lose your balance." I felt a slight pressure on my head, and I assumed that Jim had grabbed the end of the ham. "You got me?" "Uh-huh." We began crossing the black schoolyard, straining to see our feet. "Jem," I said, "I forgot my shoes. They're back behind the stage." "Well, let's go get them." But as soon as we turned around, the auditorium lights went off. "You'll have to get them tomorrow," he said. "But tomorrow's Sunday," I protested as Jem turned me homeward. "Well, you can let the janitor let you in." "Scout?" Nothing. Jem hadn't done that in a long time. I wondered what he was thinking. He would tell me when he wanted to, probably when we got home. I felt his fingers press the top of my costume. Too hard, it seemed. I shook my head. "Hey, Jem, you don't have to—" "Hush a minute, Scout," he said, pinching me up. We walked along silently. "Minute's up," I said. "What you thinking about?" I turned to look at him, but his outline was barely visible. "I thought I heard something," he said. "Stop a minute." We stopped. "You hear anything?" he asked. No. We hadn't gone 5 paces when he made me stop again. Jem, are you trying to scare me? You know I'm too old. Shh, be quiet, he said. And then I knew he wasn't joking. The night was still. I can hear his breath coming easily beside me. Occasionally there was a sudden breeze that hit my bare legs. But it was all that remained of a promised windy night. This was the stillness before a thunderstorm. We listened. I heard an old dog then, I said. It's not that, Jem answered. I hear it when we're walking along, but when we stop, I don't hear it. You hear my costume rustling. That's just Halloween gotcha. I said it more to convince myself than to Jem, for sure, because as soon as we began walking, I could hear what he was talking about, and it was not my costume. It's just old Cecil, said Jem presently. He won't get us again. Don't let him think that we're hurrying. So he slowed to a crawl. I asked Jem how Cecil could follow us in this dark. It looked to me like he'd bump into us from behind. I can see you, Scout, Jem said. How? I can't see you. Your fat streaks are showing. Miss Crenshaw painted him some of the shiny stuff so they'd show up under the footlights. I can see you pretty well. I expect Cecil can see you well enough to keep his distance. I would show Cecil that we knew he was behind us and that we were ready for him. So I turned around. Cecil Jacobs is a big wet hen, I yelled suddenly, turning around. We stopped. There was no acknowledgement, except for hen bouncing off the distant schoolhouse wall. I'll get him, said Jem. Hey! Hey! Answered the schoolhouse wall as an echo. It was unlike Cecil to hold out for so long. Once he pulled a joke, he'd repeat it time again. We should have been leapt at already. Jem signaled for me to stop again. He said softly, Scout, do you think you can take that thing off? I think so, but I haven't got much under it much. I have your dress here. I can't get it on in the dark. Okay, he said. Never mind. Jem, are you afraid? No, I think we're almost to the tree now. A few yards from that, we'll be to the road. I can see the streetlight then. Jem was talking in an unhurried, flat, toneless voice. I wondered how he would try to keep the Cecil myth going. You reckon we ought to sing, Jem? No. Be real quiet again, Scout. We had not increased our pace. Jem knew as well as I that it was difficult to walk fast without stumping a toe, tripping on stones, or other inconveniences, and I was barefooted. Maybe it was the wind rustling the trees, but there wasn't any wind, and there wasn't any trees except the big oak. Our company shuffled and dragged his feet as if he was wearing heavy shoes. Whoever it was wearing thick cotton pants, and what I thought were trees rustling was the soft swish of cotton on cotton, with every step. I felt the sand go cold under my feet, and I knew we were near the big oak. Jem pressed my head. We stopped and listened. Shufflefoot had not stopped with us this time. His trousers swished softly and steadily. Then they stopped, and he was running toward us with no child's steps. Run, Scout! Run! Jem screamed. I took one giant step, and I found myself reeling, my arms useless in the dark, and I could not keep my balance. Jem! Help me, Jem! Something crushed the chicken wire around me. Metal ripped on metal as I fell to the ground, and I rolled as far as I could, floundering to escape my wire prison. From somewhere near came scuffling, kicking sounds of shoes and flesh scraping dirt and roots. Someone rolled against me, and I felt Jem, but he was up like lightning and pulling me with him. Though my head and shoulders were free, I was so entangled that we didn't get very far. We were nearly to the road when I felt Jem's hand leave me, and I felt him jerk backwards to the ground. More scuffling, and then a dull, crunching sound. Jem screamed. I ran to the direction of Jem's scream, and I sank into a flabby male stomach. Its owner said, "Ooh," and tried to catch my arms, but they were tightly pinioned. His stomach was soft, but his arms were like steel. He slowly squeezed the breath out of me. I couldn't move. And then suddenly he was jerked backwards and flung on the ground, almost carrying me with him. I thought, Jem's up. One's mind works very slowly at times. Stunned, I stood there dumbly. The scuffling noises were dying. Someone wheezed, and then the night was still again. It was still, except for a man breathing heavily and staggering. I think he went to the tree and leaned against it. He coughed violently, a sobbing, bone-shaking cough. Jem? There was no answer but the man's heavy breathing. Jem? Jem didn't answer. The man began moving again, as if he was searching for something. I heard him groan and pull something heavy along the ground. It was slowly coming to me that there were now 4 people under the tree. Atticus? The man was walking heavily and unsteadily toward the road. I went to where I thought he'd been, and I felt frantically along the ground, reaching out with my toes. Presently I touched someone. Jem. My toes touched trousers. A belt buckle. Buttons. Something I could not identify. A collar. A face. The prickly stubble on the face told me it wasn't Jem's, and I smelled stale whiskey. I made my way along in what I thought was the direction of the road, but I wasn't sure, because I had been turned around so many times. But I found it, and I looked down the streetlight. A man was passing under it. The man was walking with the staccato steps of someone carrying a load too heavy for him. He was going around the corner. He was carrying Jem, but Jem's arm was dangling crazily in front of him. By the time I reached the corner, the man was crossing our front yard. Light from her front door framed Atticus for an instant. He ran down the steps together. He and the man took Jem inside. I was at the front door when they were going down the hall. Aunt Alexandra was running to meet me. "Call Dr. Reynolds!" Atticus's voice came sharply from Jem's room. "Where's Scout?" "Here she is," Aunt Alexandra called, pulling me along with her to the telephone. She tugged at me anxiously. "I'm all right, Auntie," I said. "You better call." She pulled the receiver down from the hook. "You, LeMay? Dr. Reynolds, quick." "Agnes, is your father home?" "Oh gosh, where is he?" "Please, tell him to come over here as soon as he comes in. Please, it's urgent." There was no need for Aunt Alexandra to identify herself. People in Maycomb knew each other's voices. Atticus came out of Jem's room. The moment Aunt Alexandra broke the connection, Atticus took the receiver from her. He rattled the hook and then said, "You, LeMay, give me the sheriff, please." "Heck, Atticus Finch. Someone's been after my children. Jem's hurt. Between here and the schoolhouse. I can't leave my boy. Run out there for me, please. See if he's still around. I doubt if you'll find him now, but I'd like to see him if you do. Gotta go now. Thanks, Heck." "Atticus, is Jem dead?" "No, Scout. Look after her sister," he called as we went down the hall. And Alexandra's fingers trembled as she unwound the crushed fabric and wire from around me. "Are you all right, darling?" she asked over and over as she worked me free. It was a relief to be out. My arms were beginning to tingle, and they were red with small hexagonal marks. I rubbed them until they felt better. "Auntie, is Jem dead?" "No, darling. No, he's unconscious. We don't know how badly he's hurt until Dr. Reynolds gets here." "Jean Louise, what happened?" "I don't know." She left it at that. She brought me something to put on, and had I thought about it then, I would never let her forget it. In her distraction, Auntie had brought me my overalls. "Please put these on, darling," she said, handing me the garment she most despised. She brushed back to Jem's room and then came back to me in the hall. She patted me vaguely, and we went back to Jem's room. A car stopped in front of the house. I knew Dr. Reynolds' step almost as well as my father's. He brought Jem and me into the world, and had led us through every childhood disease known to man, including the time that Jem fell out the treehouse. And he had never lost our friendship. Dr. Reynolds said if we had been boil-prone things, it would have been different, but we doubted it. He came to the door and said, "Good gosh." He walked toward me and said, "You're still standing." He changed his course. He knew every room in the house. He also knew that if I was in bad shape, so was Jem. After 10 forevers, Dr. Reynolds returned. "Is Jem dead?" they asked. "Far from it," he said, squatting down to me. "He's got a bump on his head, just like yours, and a broken arm, Scout. Look that way. No, don't turn your head. Roll your eyes. Now look over yon. He's got a bad break. So far as I can tell now, it's in the elbow. Looks like someone tried to wring his arm off. Now, look at me." "Then he's not dead?" "No." Dr. Reynolds got to his feet. "And we can't do much tonight, except try to make him as comfortable as we can. We'll have to x-ray his arm. Looks like he'll be wearing his arm way out by his side for a while. Don't worry, though. He'll be as good as new. Boys his age bounce." While he was talking, Dr. Reynolds had been looking keenly at me, lightly fingering the bump that was coming on my forehead. "You don't feel broke anywhere, do you?" Dr. Reynolds' small joke made me smile. "Then you don't think he's dead, then?" He put on his hat. "Now, may be wrong, of course, but I think he's very much alive. He shows all the symptoms of it. Go have a look at him, and we'll come back and get together and decide." Dr. Reynolds' step was young and brisk. Mr. Heck Tate's was not. His heavy boots punched the porch, and he opened the door awkwardly. But he said the same thing Dr. Reynolds said when he came in. "You all right, Scout?" he added. "Yes, sir. I'm going in to see Jem. Atticus and them's in there." "I'll go with you," said Mr. Tate. And Alexandra had shaded Jem's reading light with a towel. His room was dim. Jem was lying on his back. There was an ugly mark along one side of his face. His left arm lay out from his body. His elbow was bent slightly, but in the wrong direction. Jem was frowning. "Jem?" Atticus spoke. "He can't hear you, Scout. He's out like a light. He was coming around, but Dr. Reynolds put him out again." "Yes, sir." I retreated. Jem's room was large and square. Aunt Alexandra was sitting in the rocking chair by the fireplace. The man who brought Jem in was standing in the corner, leaning against the wall. He's some country man I didn't know. He must have been at the pageant and was in the vicinity when it happened. He must have heard her screams and come running. Atticus was standing by Jem's bed. Mr. Heck Tate stood in the doorway. His hat was in his hand, and a flashlight bulged from the pants pocket. He's in his work clothes. "Come in, Heck," said Atticus. "Did you find anything?" "I can't conceive of anyone low down enough to do a thing like this, but I hope you found him." Mr. Tate sniffed, glanced sharply at the man in the corner, nodded to him, and looked around the room, at Jem and Aunt Alexandra, then at Atticus. "Sit down, Mr. Finch," he said pleasantly. Atticus said, "Let's all sit down. Have that chair, Heck. I'll get another from the living room." Mr. Tate sat down in Jem's desk chair. He waited until Atticus returned and settled himself. I wondered why Atticus had not brought a chair for the man in the corner, but Atticus knew the ways of country people far better than I. Some of his rural clients would pack their long-eared steeds under the chinaberry trees in the backyard, and Atticus would often keep appointments on the back steps. This one was probably more comfortable where he was. "Mr. Finch," said Mr. Tate, "I'll tell you what I found. I found your little girl's dress out there in my car. Is that your dress, Scout?" Yes, sir, if it's a pink one with smocking, I said. Mr. Tate was behaving as if he were on the witness stand. He liked to tell things in his own way, untrammeled by state or defense. Sometimes it took him a while. I found some funny pieces of muddy-colored cloth. That's my costume, Mr. Tate. Mr. Tate ran his hand down his thighs. He rubbed his left arm and investigated Jem's mantelpiece, then seemed to be interested in the fireplace. His fingers sought his long nose. What is it, Heck? Mr. Tate found his neck and rubbed it. Bob Ewell is lying on the ground under that tree down yonder with the kitchen knife stuck under his ribs. He's dead, Mr. Finch.